call the near future, which is already here. And there is a long future which never ends. The future lives forever, as Louis Althusser once named his autobiography. And so I will now come to the present, why this marketing managerial university is emerging and what is the imperative of accumulation under late capitalism. This, what is usually known as globalization now. But the last point I would like to emphasize is that the divide between the colonizer and the colonized in the university system is not over yet. And I borrowed the title from Dead to Worse. It's a bad pun in English, but I translated this from French, who say du père au pire, from father to the worse. So it puns with English bad to worse. This is what, in my opinion, happening to the university. So let's proceed. How did it begin? I refer to a Canadian-American professor, Bill Readings, who died in 1994. His book, The University in Ruins, was published by Harvard University Press in 1996, posthumous. He uses the word about university, a paraphrasing on Jean-Francois Lyotard, who said postmodern university. He uses the word post-historical university. History is over. I prefer the term, which I have not written here. I call it posthumous university. The university already is dead. Just remember, whatever has happened to Plato's Academy, it could not be revived by the French Academy or English Royal Academy or the Swedish Academy, despite their monopoly of a Nobel Prize. So Academy is dead. The Baghdad Nizamiya Madrasa is dead. And I argue that the University of Paris or Bologna process is already dead. We are guarding a corpse, which is called the Western University. What is now being born on its corpse is called Americanization. So Americanization is actually a dead body of the old university. So let me read from his works. He says, on a certain notion of the university, Bill Readings focused his gaze, which has been widely exported throughout the world and whose current mutation seems likely to continue to frame the terms of transnational discussion, as has been referred to by Professor Habiba Jaman's paper. And Readings names the process Americanization not simply as a case of US cultural hegemony, but more emphatically as a synonym for globalization, quote unquote, in order to recognize that, quote, globalization is not a neutral process in which Washington and Dakar participate equally. You can put Dhaka also here without much loss of energy. What is the reason behind this? I'm going quickly over. One argument of Bill Readings is that the nation state is already in decline. So the autonomy of the university, which was associated with the autonomy, self-determination of the nation state, is already dead. For its part, Reading argues, the university is becoming a transnational bureaucratic corporation, either tied to the transnational instances of government, such as the European Union, or functioning independently by analogy with a transnational corporation. By analogy, it is by kias. And because economic globalization brings with it the relative decline of the nation state as the prime instance of reproduction of capital around the world. The current crisis of the university in the West, according to Bill Readings, proceeds from a shift in its social role and internal systems, one which means that the centrality of the traditional humanistic disciplines to the life of the university is no longer assured. So, what is the bureaucratic corporation about? This is also corroborated by a UNESCO study published in 1993 by a man by name, Latin American it sounds, or Spanish, Alfonso Borrero Cabal. He says, the move of the university towards the status of a bureaucratic corporation is also attested by Alfonso Borrero Cabal, whose focal point of analysis is administration, an euphemism for bureaucracy, rather than teaching or research as the central function of the university. He figures the university's tasks in terms of a generalized logic of accountability, quote unquote, in which the university must pursue excellence in all aspects of its functioning. When Dhaka University was founded, it was not founded for kindness' sake, let me remind you, not as a university in excellence. It was founded with three words. Teaching university, a residential university, as a unitary university. All these are lost, and we are revising history. Now, I begin the next section. Where does all this originate in? They began in the crisis of profitability. If you permit me to use Karl Marx, I would say it is in the rate, a fall in the rate of profit that became manifest by the middle of the 1960s after the post-war expansion of the so-called golden era. Since 1945, I quote from another man called Philip Coombs, who published a book called The World Crisis in Education from Oxford University Press in 1985. All countries have undergone fantastically swift environmental changes brought about by a number of concurrent worldwide revolutions in science and technology, in economic and political affairs, as well as in demographic and social structures. So, what happened? Educational systems have also grown and changed more rapidly than ever before, but they have adapted all too slowly in relation to the faster pace of events on the move all around them. So, Coombs continues, the consequent disparity taking many forms between educational systems and their environments is the essence of the worldwide crisis in education. This is euphemism, simply supply and demand were not matching. Aspirations rose to a high level, but the economy were not able to create enough job in the great long downturn that began around 1965. Ever since the late 1960s, the situation has had and will continue to have, as far ahead as the mind's eye can see, all the attributes of a continuing crisis. Mind you, my audience, that this is not a Marxist man speaking. This is a quite liberal man, a consultant for the World Bank, who is saying this. So what they are now prescribing for the colonized people's university, that you do not need genius. Mediocrity will be enough for you. This is the divide that we are denying when we talk of the global university. We are talking of the university, and you know this. Even educational system clings to conventional practices. This is Coombs is still continuing to speak, merely because they are traditional. If it lashes itself to inherited dogmas to stay afloat in a sea of uncertainty, if it invests folklore with the dignity of science, he says, and exalts inertia to the plane of first principles, that system is a satire on education itself. So what is their critique of the third world countries who are trying to develop from 1950 to 1970? They were saying that we also want to experience what Marshall Plan did in Western Europe. But they were denied that. Despite all the models from Rostow, Lewis, and others, all development theories then were revised at the end of the 1960s. So they were started to criticize the system of education in the third world, saying that from the standpoint of society, resources invested in perpetuating such a system are misused resources. Misused because a high proportion of its students will emerge ill-fitted to serve, well, either themselves or their society. This is euphemism for the fact that they will not get a job. So they could be exported to the Western world, but they will not accept them. They started to constrict their license on free immigration. They had all, this is the main critique, they had helped create elite cadres to run new governmental ministries and to work in the small urban modern sector of the economy, but they were ill-suited to develop the vast human and other resources of the traditional rural sector, where most of the people still lived. In fact, they deprived rural areas of their best potential developmental leaders by draining bright and ambitious young people away from the countryside to the cities. This is the critique, neoliberal critics is originating here. You will see. It is called blaming the victim. So what is the new situation? It's called educated unemployment. So they want unemployment, but not educated unemployment. So their argument, interestingly, they co-opted the theory of deschooling society. It is co-opted, I would say, because this was not even LHS original proposition, but it has been co-opted by World Bank and others. You will see this. The rapidly increasing output of educational systems everywhere, particularly at the secondary and post-secondary levels, finally caught up with backlog of post-war and post-independence manpower demands and began to outstrip the creation of new jobs by the economy. European and North American nations, which earlier welcomed educated talents from the colonial world, began stiffening immigration restrictions and in some instances expelled guest workers, even imposed measures to stem the rapidly increasing flow of foreign students. So the experience of stagflation affected education in the following ways: by contracting employment openings for new graduates, both at home and abroad, and by raising harm, raising mischief with educational costs and budgets. We know it is unprecedented in world history that the students will be paying for their own education. And they are now doing it. This was not the system in any country, but now, under late capitalism, this is the reality. And it resulted in a labor market segmentation. In capitalist countries, manufacturing stagnated in the 1970s, and the service sector experienced unprecedented growth. Okay. The net effect was to increase the segmentation of the job market between a limited number of high-paying, high-tech jobs in industry requiring advanced specialized training, for example, computer programmers, and the increasing availability of low-paying, low-skilled jobs in such expanding service areas as fast food counters, supermarkets, and discount department stores. These are all taken from UNESCO publication, by the way. None of them are my inventions. So what is happening to the colonized countries, of the former third world countries, share of the modern GDP sector in GDP with capital intensive technologies, higher productivity and higher wages grew substantially, but share of the modern sector in national labor force did not experience a corresponding growth rate. So it is a problem of unemployment. As a result, young people with a modern education found it increasingly difficult to secure a good paying, stable and secure job in the modern sector. Added to this was the spread of new communication media. Now we all know this, whose messages whetted the aspirations of people for a better life, including greater access to education. And this deschooling has been accepted by the UNESCO report. They started to talk about in the late 60s. Now you see, in 1972, a UNESCO report was published called the Four Committee report. The importance of schools, they say, in relation to other means of education is not increasing but diminishing. Its basic point was that in a fast changing world, characterized by rapidly growing and changing learning needs, and also by unacceptable growth inequalities, this is populism number one. It was essential to give attention also to strengthening other modes of education. These other modes of learning, blah, 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 soon came to be called non-formal as well as informal education. Disavowals notwithstanding, they deny, no, we use it in the developed countries as well. Non-formal education remain, in fact, glued to the poor and only limited to the developing countries. I know there are lots of people to disagree with me. Non-formal education for the colonized is the prescription the World Bank and all other international organizations came forward with. The delusion could not be exposed better. Look at their own language. They said we do this in the advanced countries as well. This is called convoluted thinking. Non-formal education, though rarely called by that name, is widely used, for example, to familiarize progressive farmers, factory workers, bank clerks, and many others, including consumers, with new technologies and new products such as computers. It is a major means by which many well-educated people continue their education in all sorts of directions. The same report continues. Not least important, non-formal education in the advanced countries enables highly trained specialists such as physicians, engineers, and scientists and top government and business managers to keep abreast of the rapidly advancing frontiers of knowledge in their respective fields. So far, so good. And they are using it for 4-year education for the children of the poor. The World Bank, UNICEF, and the USAID, AID, among others, endorse non-formal education. These scholars, inspired by Ivan Illich, also welcome this non-education. It's formally speaking non-education. You simply do an algebraic transformation, you will see what comes out. As a recipe for breaking the monopoly of the formal education system, they say revised policies placed a heavy new emphasis on basic education, which is defined not in the way Mahatma Gandhi defined, including primary schooling for children and appropriate non-formal education for out-of-school youth and adults, and a reduced priority for secondary and higher education. And now you're expecting excellent universities from here. Whatever happened to the university? The university is dead, as I said. We are already in the post-death university, posthumous university. But let me see what is happening inside the corpse. Drive towards a specialization stands in contrast to simultaneous technological integration of knowledge. This is a tendency that goes against what Professor Habibur Jaman just described. This integration, effected by ICTs, communication technologies, and information, does not lead to a unity of the universally oriented professor, but to the expert. The late capitalist world that we are experiencing is a world of experts, not ruled by an understanding that mirrors the world. This is borrowed from Leibniz, the great philosopher, but by a specialist who reflects nothing or a divided world at best. This specialist who knows more and more about less and less has landed on the other side of a universality. He seeks it in details, which to him mean totality. I borrow this from the German professor Jürgen Mittelstrass. So, paradox of information society is that it is masquerading information as knowledge, which it is not. It is a negation of knowledge. The distinction between universal and particular begins to fade. Not only that, and many professors you ask, 90 out of 100 would not be able to say the difference between between universal, particular, and individual. When society begins to see itself as information society, the distinction fades. Knowledge as information is disorienting. How oriented knowledge, not to be confused with the mere expert knowledge, how oriented knowledge can be achieved is not a question that can be answered by an appeal to yet more information. It is actually a paradox. The richer our stores of information and knowledge, the poorer our ability to orient ourselves. But this ability is precisely what education once stood for. So now ignorance is given the new name of information.
Sir, I'm really sorry, but you have 3 minutes left.
Okay, I'll try to finish. Education realizes the subject or reason in a symbolic order of culture and represses the ego as eruption of the imaginary. That is what usually is called natural. For Wilhelm von Humboldt, the subject tries to grasp as much of the world as is possible and tries to bind it to him as tightly as possible. The locus of orientation being lived experience, not a rarefied world. So here is Humboldt following Hegel, who says, founder of the Berlin University, knowledge is the universal expressed as a particular, at least if one considers both knowledge and experience together. Knowledge is the ability to impress experience for itself and to express its experience in itself. So whatever has happened to the claim of universality, I skip this. And let's say autonomy is already subverted in the managerial university. So now future of another illusion. The illusion is that this new university will take us to heaven. To believe that any university system may continue to be run as an essentially homogeneous system is an illusion now being installed more vigorously. Homogeneity as measure of all university affairs inevitably leads to a rampant mediocrity in the long run. University mission statements for their publicity brochures, this is from Bill Readings, share two distinctive features nowadays. On the one hand, they all claim that theirs is a unique educational institution. On the other hand, they all go to describe this uniqueness in exactly the same way. As so-called PRSP documents once showed, 120 countries have the same thing. Now, what is abjection in knowledge is called excellence. So this is a movement from the old liberal view to the new view. I'm skipping this because I have to finish. And then I will say, the university now that we are having is of the mediocre, by the mediocre. I don't know what is for the mediocre. Mediocre conditions do not necessarily exclude a high level of achievement or occasional feats of excellence. But this remains an exception. In general, mediocre conditions are a program for academic mediocrity. True to Andre Weil's law, which is called first-rate people hire first-rate people, but second-rate people hire third-rate ones. So I will not read too much of it. And with routine. Now, the last thing I would like to present is that this in quality assurance, evaluation, internal quality assessment, what they are going, this is an absolute reification. Who is doing this? Subjecting academic practice to standardized criteria betrays a managerial innocence of the essence of science, which lies in the discovery of the new and may come in unpredictable ways. Optimal methods cannot be laid down before the fact and cannot be limited by set rules and quality control by managers. What they are doing, they are constantly introducing new assessment tools to make teachers of that. What is happening is called degradation of teaching as a result. I'll finish in 2 slides. The scientist engaged in research becomes researcher now, becomes reified and de-individualized in specialist institutions. Research is a business specifically founded for that purpose. especially in science and technology. Research as form of life now turns into research as business, ordered in teams, projects, and alliances with the individual, taken out of research and out of teaching for that matter. With Americanization, standardized teaching becomes the norm, turns the university more and more into a high school. The teacher disappears behind the instructor in an organized bureaucracy owing to teaching requirements. However, universities are ever more in discomfort to present themselves as such. So I am finished in my concluding part. Where is the conscience of the university? Is there anything to hope in the future? I finish with this in the next one. The common endeavors of research workers and teachers require real community. The university, which was called the Universitas Literatum, the institutional totality of the various sciences, is no more than a proficient, particularly resplendent expression of community. Hence, the origin of the original guild designation, Universitas. In the process, a not insignificant role fell to philosophy once upon a time, or ethics, or theology, whatever you call it, which has long felt itself to be the conscience of the university. It is the science in which the consciousness of the totality lives and has to live. Now, finally, I would say, is there a hope for us? I cannot give you any hope. I'm only raising a question. Can the whole light up again? It comes from this Latin quotation of Nicholas of Cusa: totum relucet in omnibus omnia oblique. That means everything is lighting up again and everything is everywhere. Whereas I surprisingly found that Professor Jamil Ahmed also quoted this. I will say this: from the times of early capitalism till the onset of high capitalism in the 19th century, rational discourse, if you like, you call it philosophy or ethics, concern itself above all with the unity of knowledge. A common melody is the substantive coloration of all learning was its particular concern and the essential aspect of its method and subject. Rational discourse, therefore, when doing its job, offers a moving cantus firmus. Cantus firmus is your strong, your firm foundation that provides stability and direction in which and about which the polyphony of knowledge moves. Totum relucet in omnibus omnia ubique, as said Nicholas of Cusa, who died in the early 15th century, in relation to Arabic philosophy, which both Leibniz and Hegel made unforgettable. I would probably finish with this. It is a good idea to finish at this moment. Thank you. Have I crossed my limit, time limit, Ms. Prama?
Sir, you have perfectly finished in time. Thank you, sir.
Okay, all right.
Okay, thank you very much.
Great. Sorry, ma'am. It would have been great if there was no time constraint. But what can I do? Ma'am, please continue.
I skipped a few slides. Probably in the question and answer session, I can take resort to that. I forgot only one thing: the original sin of Western University. They are ungrateful. They borrowed their university models all from Arabic colleges, but up to Nicholas of Cusa in the 15th century, they recognized it. Now they don't. But the Western university that has become global and we are borrowing is already dead. We have to look for, I don't know what will happen in the next. Their time has crossed 1,000 to 800 years. Only a God can tell, not me. Thank you. What about the future?
Okay, thank you very much, Salimullah. I have only one question, again, a very broad question for you, and that is, if the American model really is not serving a purpose, then America is not the only place. What about any other place in any other country? Not in the past, not past Arabic universities, but at the present, that it comes close to the ideas that you are looking for, or one has to start from scratch? That is a very broad question. And now we can go to Q&A, and